My name's Bill Lineweber, and I'm President and CEO of the National Disease Research Interchange, NDRI. I'm going to provide you with a brief history and overview of NDRI. NDRI's mission is to provide human biospecimens to advance biomedical and bioscience research and development worldwide. Our organization was founded in 1980 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 not-for-profit organization governed by an independent board of directors. NDRI is funded in part by the National Institutes of Health and has received this funding for over 30 consecutive years. We ship thousands of biospecimens to researchers each year throughout the world, and we're cited in approximately 200 publications annually as the source for tissues used in experiments published in scientific journals. As I mentioned previously, NDRI is governed by an independent board of directors. Our board is comprised of individuals from the biomedical research enterprises and business sectors. NDRI also has a scientific advisory council that we call on for strategic advice and guidance on issues that impact the researchers that we serve or the various stakeholder communities with whom we interact. As I mentioned earlier, NDRI has been funded by the National Institutes of Health for over 30 consecutive years. That funding comes in the form of a U42 Research Resource Grant out of the Office of the Director, Office of Research Infrastructure Programs. The grant is funded by the Office of the Director with contributions by various institutes across the NIH that are identified in the various bubbles you see in the slide before you. Additional funding for NDRI comes from our relationships in the corporate sector with pharmaceutical and biotechnology partners, as well as a large number of special initiatives that we're engaged with patient advocacy organizations, government contractors, other non-NIH federal funding resources, and NIH supplemental funding outside of the U42 grant that we've received for a number of years.
My name is Thomas Bell. I'm the Vice President of Operations for NDRI. So I'm going to present the next 9 slides, and this 9 slides is going to give an overview of our operations team. So the goal of our operations team is to provide 24/7 service and support for biomedical researchers that need human tissues. So NDRI has a nationwide network that we can obtain human tissues and distribute it to biomedical researchers across the world. The first group that I'd like to review is my scientific services team. The goal of the scientific services team is to work with the biomedical researchers to recruit new projects, to vet projects, to develop an application with the researcher, and then to turn on the project and obtain samples for them. So we have a 5-step process to do this. NDRI actively presents at research meetings, recruiting research scientists that need human biospecimens. When we contact researchers that need biospecimens, we need to vet their project. It's not a straightforward request. So NDRI develops a research application with them. In the next slide, I'll highlight a couple more steps on that process. Once we finalize the application, we call activate or turn on the project. And then once the project's turned on, we just simply monitor the project and provide customer support to make sure they get the tissues they need for their research. So the next slide just highlights the application process at a very high level. So step number 1 is their scientists submit an application that's similar to a mini grant, provide the goals of the project, the tissue needs, etc. to NDRI. NDRI takes this information and reviews it. So we have an external feasibility team. So the feasibility team will have 2 outcomes in the review a project. It can be feasible or not. For the feasible projects, we simply move on to the next step, move it forward, and develop what we call custom protocols to start the project and get the tissues they need. Everything is project driven at NDRI. If the project is not feasible, NDRI simply provides guidance and feedback to try and make the project feasible, to try and work with the scientist. The end goal there, it needs to be able to work for NDRI. We need to be able to get the samples they need. We don't want the scientists disappointed or the donor families disappointed. And then part two of that is the scientists need the appropriate samples to meet their experimental needs. So there's this negotiation. Hopefully we can turn it into a feasible request. Most negotiations do lead to a positive outcome there. And then we move into the project development phase that I described. So for requests that are deemed feasible, so once we've gone through that negotiation, there's still two types of, I'll call it, request. The upper one is a standard request. The standard request is simply something we do every day. We get whole eyes, whole organs, tissue samples, surgical samples. Someone's having a tumor removed, we can collect that sample. Someone's having, we can collect a whole heart, piece of skin, et cetera. So these are things, just very quick examples at a very high level on requests that we get, and we can just roll it right into our process. So the scientist fills the application out, we set up the protocols, and then it's called a standard request, and we can activate that. The second type of feasible requests are called custom requests. So here we've deemed it feasible, but it's not something we do every day. So it's something that's a little outside. Maybe we need a new partner to get the samples. Maybe we need to get extra donor information. Maybe we need to develop extra recovery steps for the process to make sure it's acquired in the way they want it. So it's not a standard request, it's called a custom request, but it's still a very feasible request. So at the end of the day, these two processes, the goal is to get a sample that meets the experimental needs of the scientist. So both are equally valuable scientific samples. Just sometimes the scientists need something that's a little more straightforward to get, and sometimes they have something that's a little more complicated. It's all based on their research needs. So where the feasible samples come from, we have a group we call 5 different partners we work with. So they make up our nationwide procurement network. So the first procurement partner is called organ procurement organizations. These are organizations that predominantly get tissues and organs for transplantation. So the tissues and organs that aren't eligible for transplant can be used for biomedical research. So NDRI partners with all the organ procurement organizations in the United States, and we get donation opportunities for research from them. The second group is called a tissue bank. So these groups collect tissues and sometimes anatomical structures for research. So again, they're a little different. They're not collecting tissues that would go to transplant. They're collecting tissues that are outside of the transplant niche. So these tissues are offered to NDRI, and then NDRI can offer these tissue samples to the researchers. Hospitals is the third group. So hospitals would be simply someone's going in for a surgical procedure, and we call it surgical discards, those tissues that are removed from the patient. Instead of throwing them out, they can be utilized for research. So for example, if someone has hip replacement, you can take the femoral head, you can take the cartilage that's removed, and we can capture those tissues, ship them to a biomedical research that's interested in studying osteoarthritis or something to that effect. Same fourth one is also pretty self-explanatory, eye banks. So eyes and ocular tissues are collected throughout the United States through a variety of different eye banks. So for these tissues that can't be used for transplant, the discards from those eyes or the whole eyes themselves that can't be used, then those tissues can be offered for biomedical research. So for instance, corneas are very frequently transplanted. So the rest of the eye, once the cornea is removed, still has several valuable ocular tissues that could be used for research. So the first 4 groups are the most common groups that we work with. The 5th group list that we call recovery personnel. And this is a little different and something somewhat unique to NDRI. So here, these are donors that don't fit into the first 4 groups. So the donors that wouldn't be eligible to donate to an organ procurement organization, a tissue bank, a hospital, or an eye bank. But NDRI then provides another opportunity there for them to donate. So these donors can register directly with NDRI. And when they register directly with NDRI, NDRI provides the consent and the authorization to obtain tissues for research. And then the NDRI coordinates the recovery. So we have recovery personnel that are contracted with us that can go out and make these recoveries for them. So once these tissues are obtained, then we offer them to our biomedical researchers. And we'll explain a little bit later in the presentation on how what we call it matching occurs. So as listed on the previous slide, there was 5 different donation opportunities. So these 5 donation opportunities fall into what I'll call 4 different types of donor profiles. So the first one is a deceased donor. So these are donors that can do postmortem donations. So the eye banks, the tissue banks, and the OPOs, the organ procurement organizations, provide donation opportunities to NDRI through this opportunity. Middle one is living patients. This would fall under our surgical program. So individuals that are going in for surgeries, NDRI can partner with surgical centers and hospitals to get tissues from living patients. The third one's kind of a hybrid, I'll call it. So they're patients participating in clinical trials. So here NDRI could get donation opportunities through living patients or perhaps through deceased, depending on the type of project. And then the fourth one I've described previously, the pre-registered donors with NDRI. That's our private recovery personnel that do those donations. So these four groups fall into those five, I'll call it a five-pronged recovery approach. So the advantage of this five-pronged recovery approach is it provides the most comprehensive donation opportunity for a family. And then this allows the biomedical researchers access to the widest range of tissues, and collectively that gives the strongest approach for science. So when donating tissues, authorization and consent is a very important topic. So this slide highlights NDRI's authorization and consent. Our protocol is approved by the University of Pennsylvania IRB. So our authorization includes general research, but it also includes some other key features. It highlights that a for-profit entity could use the tissues. These tissues could be used to develop therapeutics, diagnostics, or even in genomic sequencing studies. So it's for general research, but also clearly points out some other key issues in the consent or authorization. The other items to point out on this slide is, for scientists, having additional information in the health record can be very valuable for the studies. So we do offer the opportunity to get additional information on the donor's health records for each donation. So again, this is just to enable the scientific studies to give more power to the investigator and the studies they're trying to pursue. And then the fourth one, obviously very important. Of course, there's no payment to the donor or decision maker. So in addition to our standard consent, we also have what's called expanded consents. So our expanded consents are used for our custom projects mostly. And here the project has some very specific things that they want called out. So we call protocol-specific IRB approval. So we take it to the University of Pennsylvania, we present this project and incorporate the different features that need to be in the consent. So whether it's development of cell lines, incorporating different objectives such as product development, et cetera. If a project sponsor needs these additional things, NDRI has this ability to basically request a specialized project authorization or consent for that project, and that's a very valuable thing for the investigator. So the last couple of slides kind of highlight how it all happens, I'll say. So our fulfillment group is, I'll call our matching group. So this is our 24/7, 365 days a year call center. So this call center receives donation opportunities every day. And the goal of this call center is to match the donation opportunities to our investigator requests. So on a given day, we have about 400 projects. Those projects that have multiple requests in them. So we have over 1,000 opportunities for scientists to request tissues with us every day that we call active. And then the donation opportunities are matched to these projects. So this slide kind of highlights in 5 simple steps what the fulfillment team needs to do. They simply need to take the offer, we call it. So if a donation opportunity is presented to us, we need to review the donor information or review the authorization and consent. Once that's check that box, then we match it with our active project. So the matching and screening is going to be the donor has these types of characteristics, these types of tissues are available, compared to what active research projects we have and that would need tissues from that donor profile or those donor tissues. Assuming there's a match, then we go to the recovery step. So then NDRI coordinates the recovery. We contact our partners recover the tissues. They follow very specific instructions that we provide that fit the research project. It details everything for how the recovery is done, how the things are shipped. Everything is organized for the recovery partner to fit the experimental needs of the scientist. Once the tissues are obtained, they're shipped to the researcher. NDRI tracks the shipment, use standard couriers or FedEx to make sure the samples are delivered in a timely fashion. Some samples are shipped within under 24 hours. Some samples are shipped, if they're frozen, for instance, up to 48 hours. It depends on what the investigator needs and how the recovery was done. So the shipping is tracked. Once the investigator receives it, NDRI we call closes the case. So then we review all the donor files, make sure that we have all the proper documentation, and then store those files.
Hi, this is Gene Copen, Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. NDRI offers an array of services designed to meet the critical experimental needs of biomedical researchers. These include the ethical sourcing and distribution of normal disease human organs, tissues, and body fluids, diagnostic pathology services such as histological processing and analysis, as well as retinal imaging of postmortem eyes. NDRI also offers a host of scientific support services that range from the vetting and onboarding of the investigator's research project to the development of project-specific documentation, protocols, and operating procedures. For the short-term and long-term storage of frozen and fixed specimens, NDRI maintains a biorepository accredited by the American College of Pathologists. All specimens, whether shipped to the researcher directly from a tissue source site or from NDRI's biorepository, are packaged and transported in accordance with the International Air Transport Association regulations for Category B biological substances. For large orders, specimens are typically batch shipped to reduce costs. NDRI also provides a variety of services for patient advocacy groups and foundations interested in collecting and distributing patient samples for biomedical research but may not have the infrastructure needed to do it themselves. Finally, for large complex projects, NDRI has the capability and expertise to identify, audit, onboard, and manage the suppliers and vendors needed to ensure long-term supply commitments can be met. For over 30 years, NDRI has collaborated with numerous patient advocacy groups and foundations to help advance research and development for their patients and families. Some of our current collaborations include those with the Children's Tumor Foundation, FSH Society, the LAM Foundation, Bay Area Lyme Foundation, and the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, to name only a few. The services that we provide each vary to some extent, but generally range from the consenting of patients for organ and tissue donation to the coordination, procurement, storage, and distribution of their donated specimens to approved researchers. NDRI is also a trusted resource for military medical researchers who are studying war-related illness. We support this type of work in several different ways, one of which is via our ability to identify postmortem donors with a history of trauma or toxin exposure through our partnerships with the nation's organ procurement organizations and tissue banks. We can also work with veteran or DoD patient registries to identify, consent, and recover donated specimens from servicemen and women who may have been injured or exposed to chemical toxins during military deployment. NDRI maintains robust quality management systems to ensure that the highest quality standards are met for the ethical sourcing, storage, and distribution of human biosciences. Our quality management systems include an on-site quality assurance department, a system for document control, training programs for internal staff as well as external sourcing and processing partners, a problem management system, and a records management system. NDRI employs diverse solutions QMS software to assist in the management of these programs. NDRI provides end-to-end solutions for your project-driven experimental needs. Unlike traditional biobanks, NDRI sources from its nationwide network of partners in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whether you need to access high-quality normal or diseased human organs or tissues or body fluids from specific patient populations, NDRI can help you to source what you need for your intended experimental use. Thank you for viewing our webinar. For more information, please visit our website at ndriresource.org or call us at 215-557-7361. Thank you and have a great day.